The rain tapped lightly against the roof as Margaret stood in the doorway of the old house. She hadn't been back here in years. Not since Edward had taken the guest room and silence had become their shared language. Now the silence was absolute. He was gone. The funeral had been small. A few distant relatives, a neighbor. No eulogy. Margaret hadn't wanted one. What would she say? That they had loved each other once, fiercely, and then simply existed side by side. She carried in 2 suitcases, a faded coat, and her late husband's ashes. She didn't cry. Not that day. The house smelled like dust and forgotten things. The air felt heavier, as if memories were clinging to the furniture. Margaret moved room by room. Dishes still in the sink. A book half read on his nightstand. Slippers neatly placed by the bed he died in. She didn't touch them. She just kept walking. In the attic, a soft light poured through the small round window. Cobwebs framed the space like lace. Boxes lined the walls, most unlabeled. She opened one at random. Tax papers from 1989. Another, a collection of old Christmas cards. And then a small wooden box, smooth, polished. Unlike the others, it had one inscription on the lid. For Margaret, 1 per day. Her breath caught. She stared at it for a long time. She wasn't sure why her hands trembled as she lifted the lid. Inside were 365 envelopes, numbered, neatly tied together in stacks of 12. She picked the first one. It read simply, 1, Margaret. Hesitated, then sat down on the floor, crossed her legs like a child, and opened it. Inside, a letter in Edward's handwriting. Dear Margaret, if you're reading this, I've already gone. I'm sorry for that. There's a lot I never said, too much I never fixed. But I want you to know this isn't a goodbye. This is a beginning. 1 letter each day for a year. Just you and me again. Her hands trembled harder. She put the letter down, stared at the box, and for the first time in weeks, she whispered aloud, Edward, what are you doing? The next morning, she made tea. Earl Grey, 1 sugar. The way she always had. She hadn't spoken to anyone in 3 days. The kettle steamed quietly while she stared at envelope number 2. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she set it beside her teacup and walked barefoot through the house. She opened windows, let the air in, listened to the creaking floorboards. Finally, she sat, opened the letter. 2, I miss your laugh. The real one. The one that escapes when you're trying not to laugh at something ridiculous. I haven't heard it in years, not because it disappeared, but because I stopped giving you reasons for it. Margaret felt something shift in her chest. A tightness she hadn't known was there. She folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and left it on the kitchen counter. That night, she dreamed of their first apartment. The yellow walls, the broken sink, the way he used to dance in his underwear just to make her laugh. The next day, letter 3. 3. I never told you how scared I was when the doctor said degenerative. I wasn't scared of dying. I was scared of forgetting you. I started writing these letters the day I got the prognosis. She sat down hard. Degenerative? She whispered. No one had said anything about that. Letter 4 revealed it all. He had been diagnosed almost a year before he died. A slow decline, hidden symptoms. He hadn't wanted to be a burden. He didn't want her to remember him sick. She read it 3 times. Then she opened letter 5 early. I'm sorry for choosing silence. I thought I was protecting you. Maybe I was just protecting myself. By letter 6, she had cleared the coffee table and begun stacking the envelopes carefully, one by one. She even dusted the living room shelf for the first time in months. The house didn't feel so heavy anymore. She didn't feel so invisible. She made tea again the next morning and sat with envelope number 7, like it was a conversation waiting to be answered. By the end of the first week, Margaret had developed a rhythm: wake up, tea, envelope, letter. Some days the letters were light, a memory from a vacation, a silly inside joke, or description of how she looked the first time he saw her. You were wearing green. Your hair was in that messy knot you always pretend you don't care about. I thought you looked like a storm in a dress. She smiled, actually smiled. Other letters were heavier. I should have said something when you lost your mother. I didn't know how to hold you through your grief, so I said nothing. I regret that silence more than anything. She read that one out loud. Me too, she whispered. In the evening, she began walking through the neighborhood. People waved. She nodded. She didn't talk much yet, but she moved. And that was something. On the 10th day, she found herself writing. Not journaling, replying. Edward, I don't know why you're doing this, but I'm reading. I'm here. And I think I miss you more now than when you first left. She folded the letter, placed it on the nightstand beside envelope 11, then went to bed and dreamt of his handwriting. By day 12, the letters shifted. They weren't just apologies or memories, they were observations. You always clench your jaw when you're trying not to cry. I wonder if you're doing that now. I hope you're not. I hope you're letting it fall. She wasn't. Not yet, but she knew it was coming. The letters had become a mirror, and Margaret wasn't ready for everything she might see. Still, each morning she showed up. She poured her tea, opened the envelope, let Edward speak, and sometimes even answered. It was the 17th letter that broke her. She didn't expect it. There was no build-up, just 5 lines. Do you remember the day we fought by the river? You cried in the car. I drove us home in silence. That night I slept on the couch. You made me tea in the morning anyway. I never said thank you. Margaret clutched the letter against her chest and sobbed. Not the loud kind, not the dramatic kind, the slow, breathless kind, the grief that lives under the ribs, the kind you carry for years without realizing. She cried until the sky turned orange through the windows. When she finally stood, she walked to the kitchen, made tea, and placed the letter beside it, as if he were coming to sit down. That night, she opened letters 18 and 19 back to back. She didn't want to stop. The house no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like a conversation. Edward had been gone nearly a month now, but somehow he was speaking louder than he ever had in life. On letter 20, he wrote, I always believed you were the strongest person in every room. I realize now that strength looks a lot like sadness hidden with grace. She read that line 3 times, then she stood in front of the mirror, tired eyes, wrinkled skin, a face she hadn't studied in years. She touched her own cheek. I'm still here, she said. It startled her to hear her voice out loud, but it also soothed her. She opened the letter 21 early. I don't know how far you'll get with at ease. Maybe you'll stop after 20. Maybe you'll hate me. But if you're still reading, Margaret, then maybe I didn't fail entirely. She folded it gently and whispered, You didn't! Not yet. The following morning, Margaret dressed with intention, not for anyone else, for herself. A clean sweater, brushed hair, lipstick she hadn't worn in 2 years. She placed letter 22 in her cardigan pocket and stepped outside. The breeze was cool but gentle, the same kind they used to enjoy during their afternoon walks. Before the silence settled in, she walked to the edge of the neighborhood, sat on the bench near the old bakery, opened the letter. I hope you go outside today. I hope you sit on that bench you love, the one with the chipped paint. I hope you let the wind remind you you're still breathing, and that's something, she smiled. Just a little. On the way home, she passed a boy drawing chalk hearts on the sidewalk. He looked up and grinned. She smiled back. That evening, she placed all 22 letters back in their envelopes, arranged them neatly in a wooden box she kept near her bed. Then she added her own. Dear Edward, I'm still reading. I'm still here. She turned off the light. For the first time in weeks, she slept without waking up and dreamed of nothing, only peace. Margaret began setting her alarm earlier, not out of obligation, but anticipation. The letters had become more than memories. They were lifelines, routines, a thread pulling her from one day into the next. She made breakfast now, oatmeal, sometimes eggs. She turned on the radio not to listen, just to fill the air. Letter 23 sat beside her teacup. Do you remember the beach trip in '88? You were upset with me. I don't even remember why, but I remember the way you looked. At the ocean, like it was the only thing left that made sense. Margaret folded the letter and whispered, It still is. That afternoon, she climbed into the attic, not to read, to find something. She opened an old trunk that hadn't been touched since their son left home. Inside, drawings, a music box, and a photo album from decades ago. In one of the pockets, folded carefully, was a postcard Edward had never sent. It was addressed to their son, Jamie. I miss you, son. I'm sorry I didn't know how to say that out loud. Her throat tightened. She placed the postcard on her desk. Later that night, she found herself writing again, but this time, not to Edward, to Jamie. She hadn't spoken to her son in nearly 4 years, not since the Thanksgiving argument. She blamed him for leaving too soon. He blamed her for letting Edward fade. Both had been right in their own ways, and wrong in others. Margaret didn't expect a reply. She just wrote, Dear Jamie, I read something today that reminded me how much I've been silent. I miss you. No expectations, just that. Love, Mom. She placed the letter in an envelope and stared at it. She didn't mail it yet, but she didn't hide it either. And that was the beginning. The next series of letters dug deeper. Edward began recounting not just moments, but the emotions he never vocalized. Margaret, I never told you how much I envied your strength. I mistook your silence for distance, when maybe it was just your way of holding everything together. Another. There were nights I wanted to reach for your hand, but shame tied my fingers. I wasn't angry with you. I was angry with myself for not knowing how to love you better. Each letter was a confession wrapped in gentleness. Margaret felt like she was living in two timelines. The one where Edward was alive but distant, and the one where he was gone but finally speaking. She began walking farther, down to the market, to the riverbank. She wore her hair loose. She bought fresh bread again. One afternoon, she ran into June, her old neighbor. June gasped, touched her shoulder, and said, "You look well." Margaret almost apologized. Then she caught herself and said, "I think I'm starting to remember how." They had coffee together, talked about everything but Edward. Margaret didn't mention the letters, not yet. That night, she read letter 31. There's a painting in the hallway. You hung it the year your mother passed. I never liked it, but I never told you you loved it, and that made it sacred. She laughed out loud. For the first time in months, I always knew. She said to the letter, "You had terrible taste." She found herself talking to the letters more, answering, adding notes in the margins, filling pages in her own notebook with reactions, questions, memories the letters pulled up from under the dust. On the 50th day, she read, "If you've made it this far, it means you haven't given up on me or on us. Thank you," she whispered back. "I haven't, but I'm not sure what happens next." And for the first time, she wasn't afraid of the question. On the 55th letter, Edward mentioned their son. "I wish I'd written Jamie more, called him more, told him I was proud, but I thought I had time. We always think we have time." Margaret paused halfway through that one. She took a deep breath and walked to her desk. The letter to Jamie was still there, unmailed. She found a stamp, sealed it, and dropped it in the mailbox before she could change her mind. That night, she couldn't sleep. What would he think? Would he laugh? Would he be angry? Would he reply? She almost regretted it until the next morning when she saw an email notification on her phone. "Got your letter. Been thinking of you too. Want to talk this weekend?" She stared at the message until her tea went cold. Margaret began reading the letters aloud now, even when no one was around. There was something freeing in hearing Edward's words in her own voice. It made him feel closer. It made her feel less alone. Letter 63 read, "You were never hard to love. I just made it hard to show. I'm sorry I let our house grow so quiet. I should have fought harder for the sound of your voice," she whispered. Then listened now and kept reading. The weekend came. Jamie called. They talked for 20 minutes. It was cautious, a little stiff, but it ended with, "Love you, Mom." She didn't cry on the call, but she did after. Then she opened letter 67. It simply said, "If you've spoken to Jamie by now, then maybe we're healing together." She laughed through her tears. "Did you plan this, Edward?" She looked up at the ceiling. "You did, didn't you?" And for the first time since he died, she felt like she wasn't just receiving letters. She was part of something unfolding, something still alive. Margaret began rereading the earlier letters. They felt different now. What once sounded like regret now felt like release, as if Edward hadn't just been apologizing. He had been preparing her for something. Letter 74. "I don't expect you to forgive me in a day, or even in a year, but if these words soften something in you, then maybe I've done something right." She tucked that one in her coat pocket and carried it with her to the grocery store. She didn't need to. She just wanted to. At checkout, the clerk smiled and said, "You always look so peaceful." She didn't know how to respond, so she just said, "I'm learning." That afternoon, she visited the church she and Edward had once attended, back when Jamie was a child, and Margaret still believed in prayer. She didn't stay long, but she sat in the back row and whispered, "Thank you." Not to God, not to Edward, just into the space between. Letter 79 was shorter than usual. What if love doesn't end when we stop saying it? What if it echoes through teacups and park benches and the smell of rosemary? She put down the letter, walked into the kitchen, and for the first time since his death, She made Edward's favorite meal, rosemary chicken with lemon. She sat at the table, set 2 plates, poured 2 cups of tea, and whispered, "You're still here." On letter 82, Edward confessed his greatest fear. It wasn't dying. Margaret! It was being forgotten by the only person who ever truly saw me. She folded the letter carefully, looked at the photo of them on the bookshelf, then at her own hands, trembling, aging, but still hers. "I didn't forget you," she said. "I just didn't know how to carry you. Till now," letter 85. Changed something. Margaret, if you've made it this far, you deserve to know. This wasn't just about saying goodbye. It was about leaving space for you to say something back. I spent years filling the silence between us with assumptions. Maybe now you can fill it with something else. She read the letter slowly, then folded it. That night, she sat on the porch with a notebook. She began writing a letter, not to Edward, not to Jamie, not even to herself, but to the woman she had once been. "Dear me, I forgive you for not knowing what to say, for staying quiet when your heart was loud, for enduring more than you had to, for loving in ways that were never seen. You did your best, and now you can breathe again." She signed it, folded it, and placed it inside the wooden box beside Edward's letters. In the morning, she found envelope 86 waiting. It read, "If you ever write back, I'll be listening. Always. With love, Edward." She smiled, wiped a tear, and said, then I hope you're listening now." Because the silence no longer hurt. It held her, and she no longer feared the days ahead because they were filled with letters still unopened and memories still unfolding. And for the first time in a long, long while, Margaret felt like she had somewhere to go, even if it was just deeper into herself, even if it was just forward, one envelope at a time. Margaret didn't read the next letter the following morning. Instead, she sat by the window for over an hour, just watching the wind move through the trees. The box remained on the table. Envelope 87 waited patiently. There was no sadness in the delay, just stillness. She was starting to understand that not every day needed a revelation. Some days were just days. When she finally opened the envelope, it read, "Today, I don't want to say much. I just want you to know, whatever you do with this day, it's enough. You're enough." She placed the letter gently on the table and smiled. That afternoon, she joined a small book group at the community center, the same group she had avoided for years. She didn't speak much, just listened, but afterward, a woman named Jean approached her. "First time?" Margaret nodded. "You should come again. Quiet voices always have the most to say." Letter 90 spoke of art. "I used to love watching you paint, even if you only did it once a year. You always said your hands weren't good enough. I always thought they were telling stories louder than your words." The next day, Margaret opened the bottom drawer of her dresser. Inside was a forgotten sketchbook. Still blank, she sharpened a pencil and began, not with a masterpiece, but with a teacup, a table, a man's folded hands, her own memory pressed into paper. It didn't look perfect, it looked honest, and that was enough. The drawings became part of her routine. Every morning after reading a letter, she would sketch something small, an image the words evoked, or a moment they reminded her of. She didn't show them to anyone, not yet. They were just for her. Letter 93 was folded differently than the others. Tucked inside was a dried flower, pressed flat, delicate. "From the trail you loved, near that stone bench by the creek. I picked it the day you said you didn't feel seen anymore. I didn't know how to fix what I broke, but I wanted you to know I heard you." Margaret held the flower in her palm for a long time, then placed it inside the front cover of her sketchbook. The next few letters shifted tone. They weren't just about the past, they were about her future. "I hope by now you're not just surviving. I hope you've laughed this week. I hope something caught your breath in a good way." She had. While sketching in the garden, a squirrel had stolen her toast right off the plate. She had laughed so hard she startled herself. It had been so loud, so real, she almost expected Edward to walk through the back door and ask what was so funny. Instead, she told the empty kitchen what happened and laughed again. Letter 99. "When this began, I didn't know how many of these you'd read. I thought you might stop at 5, maybe 10. But if you're still here, then maybe this is more than goodbye. Maybe it's us learning to speak again." Margaret didn't reply with words. She just placed the letter inside a new envelope, one she labeled "Speak." It felt right. On day 100, there was no letter in the box. Margaret checked again. Counted. There was a gap. She tilted the box, searched the corners, even lifted the lining. Nothing. For the first time since it began, there was silence. Not the painful kind, the curious kind. That afternoon, she went for a walk, sat on a bench by the creek. The one Edward mentioned in letter 93. She didn't bring a letter with her, but she brought her sketchbook. She drew the tree above her. The way the branches leaned like listening ears. The stone bench, her own lap. Then she wrote on the corner of the page. Maybe you knew I needed to write this one. The next day, letter 101 was back in the box, exactly where the gap had been. She blinked, stunned. It hadn't been there the day before, she was certain. She unfolded it slowly. Did you notice one missing? That was yours, a space. For you to say what I couldn't. If you filled it, I'm proud of you. If not, I hope you know you still can. She placed the letter beside her drawing, then whispered, "You clever old man." The letters after that took on a gentler rhythm. Not everyone held a memory or confession. Some just offered comfort. I hope today felt kind. Drink water. Open a window. Let the light in. I'm still with you. I always was. It wasn't a haunting. It wasn't a miracle. It was a man who had finally found a way to speak, and a woman learning how to listen with her whole self. On day 105, Margaret hosted Jamie for dinner. He brought a bottle of wine and stories from the past year. They didn't talk about the argument. They didn't need to. They talked about music, about how cold the house used to get in winter, about Edward's terrible attempts at fixing the sink. At one point, Jamie looked at her sketchbook, which lay open on the table. "These yours?" he asked. She nodded, a little embarrassed. They're beautiful," he said. "Dad would have loved them." Later that night, Margaret opened letter 106. "If Jamie comes over, don't make it about me. Just sit, laugh if you can. Let him see you, not the version you think he wants, just you. That's always been enough." She clutched the letter and stared out the window for a long time. Then she added a new sketch. 2 mugs side by side, one full, one half empty. Underneath she wrote, "Still talking." The next few letters brought up things she had forgotten, like the summer they lost power and played cards by candlelight for 3 nights straight, or the stray cat she fed behind the garage that Edward pretended not to like. But secretly named. They weren't grand memories, but they were soft ones, the kind that shape a life, and the kind she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Letter 112 said, "I always imagined you'd outlive me, but I never imagined how much life you still had left to live. I hope you're finding that again." She was quietly but fully, and it showed in her steps, her eyes, her voice, even in the silence. By the time she reached letter 115, Margaret began placing each one in protective sleeves. She wasn't sure why. Maybe she wanted to preserve them. Maybe she was preparing for something she hadn't yet admitted. That morning, the letter was folded in the shape of a heart. Inside, "I never took you dancing enough. I thought you didn't like it, but now I know you just didn't want to do it alone." Margaret placed a record on the old player and danced alone in her living room, arms open, eyes closed. She didn't need rhythm. She just needed to move. Later that evening, she sketched her dancing feet. Just outlines, no shading, like motion caught in stillness. Then she added another page to the front of the book, a dedication to the man who wrote when he couldn't speak, and to the woman who answered without words. She didn't feel broken anymore. She didn't feel haunted. She felt whole. And not because he had fixed her, but because he had reminded her she was never lost, only paused, waiting for the page to turn, and she turned it one day at a time, one letter at a time, oneself rediscovered in the mirror, still her, still healing, still here. Day 121. Margaret opened the letter before sunrise. The sky was still a deep blue, the light barely creeping across the horizon. If this morning feels heavy, it's okay. You've been carrying so much, but today, just breathe. Let the world come to you. She stepped outside barefoot. The grass was cold, wet with dew. She closed her eyes and let the early chill settle on her skin. There was something sacred in that quiet moment. Not profound, just present. Later, she sat by the fireplace and sorted through the letters. Not reading them, just touching. Them. Remembering where she was, who she was, when each one arrived. Each letter had changed something in her. Each envelope held a version of herself she had met, forgiven, or released. Letter 122 said, "I wonder if you've smiled more this month than the one before. I hope so. I used to count the days by how often I heard you laugh. I never told you that. I didn't want you to know how much power you had over my happiness. She laughed right then, soft and genuine. You old fool, she said aloud. Why didn't you say these things while you were here? No one answered, of course, but she imagined him smiling somewhere, not with regret, with relief, because finally she was laughing again, and that was what he had hoped for all along. By day 130, Margaret had filled 2 sketchbooks. The drawings weren't polished. Some were smudged, others unfinished, but each one told a story. A spoon resting in a chipped bowl, the window in her bedroom on a rainy afternoon, the imprint of Edward's signature traced over in charcoal. She began to wonder if she should do something with them. Not for the world, for Jamie, for herself, for the version of Edward that still lived inside the letters. Letter 131 read, "You always had a way of capturing things without needing to speak. A glance, a hand on my shoulder, a note in my coat pocket. I never said, this. Your silence was not absence. It was presence, made sacred." She paused after reading that one, then pulled a chair to the table and began organizing the pages, chronologically, like chapters in a book. A week later, she printed a small run of bound sketchbooks at the library. 10 copies. She titled it simply, "Still Here." No author name, just the drawings and a dedication inside for anyone who's ever held on longer than they thought they could. She left one at the community center, another at the church. One went into Jamie's hands. The rest she gave away, quietly, not seeking praise, only hoping someone might feel a little less alone. Jamie called more often now, not daily, not scheduled, but enough. One evening, he brought over an old photo album Margaret hadn't seen in years. They sat on the floor flipping through images of birthdays, beach trips, and blurry Christmas mornings. Margaret pointed to a picture of, wow, Edward wearing a ridiculous paper crown. "He made you wear that too," Jamie laughed. "He made everyone wear it," Margaret replied, "even the cat." They laughed until they cried. It was the kind of laughter that heals things, the kind that opens doors that were stuck shut for decades. That night, she opened the letter 138. If Jamie laughs with you again, let it echo. Let it wash the dust off the years. And if you cry, let that be okay too. You've earned both. She placed the letter beside the photo album. Then she added a new sketch, a paper crown on top of a worn chair. Margaret received a letter from someone at the community center, a woman named Eleanor. She had found one of the sketchbooks. "I don't know who you are, but your drawings reminded me of my mother's hands. I hadn't cried for her in years, thank you." Margaret folded the note and placed it inside Edward's box, right between letters 139 and 140. Then she whispered, "Look at that, love. Your words are still working." And for the first time, she realized so were hers. Day 145, letter waiting, tea steaming. Margaret had a small ritual now, placing one fresh flower in a jar beside the envelope before opening it. Today's was lavender. She inhaled deeply and read, "There are no more big things I need to confess, only small truths, like how I loved the way you stirred your coffee even when there was nothing in it, or how I would sometimes watch you sleep and count your breaths. I never stopped loving you. I just forgot how to show it." She closed the letter and didn't cry. She just placed it face up on the table so the room could feel it too. Later, she walked to the bench by the creek and brought 2 letters with her, one for reading, one blank. She read Edward's, then she wrote her own. "Dear Edward, I forgive you. I forgave you a while ago, but I needed to say it today. Not because you're gone, but because I'm still here, and I need space in my heart for the life that remains." She folded the note and placed it between 2 stones on the bench. Let the wind decide what happened next, and walked home slower than usual, but lighter. Spring arrived. The first real one Margaret had noticed in years. She opened the windows wide, hung our clean curtains, moved Edward's box to a new shelf next to a plant Jamie had given her. She even painted the front door a shade of blue. Edward had once said, reminded him of her eyes. Letter 150 read, "I don't know what day. It is as you read this. But I hope the sun is out. I hope there's music. And I hope you know that even now I love you in every quiet thing." Margaret placed the letter under a vase of fresh tulips, then sat with her sketchbook and began a new drawing. A window cracked, and sunlight beaming across a worn kitchen table, a letter barely visible underneath a teacup. She titled it, alive. At the community center, a volunteer approached her with an idea. What if we start a letter writing group? For people grieving, you don't even have to talk, just write. Margaret didn't hesitate. She said yes. The first meeting had 4 people. The next 12. She didn't speak much at first, but by the 3rd week, she brought her sketchbooks and a copy of Edward's first letter. She read it aloud and for the first time shared their story, not as an ending, but as a beginning. Day 160. Only a few letters remained. Margaret didn't rush them. She took one every 3 or 4 days now, savoring them like rare wine, like sacred pages. Letter 100 and 61 read, "If you ever feel lost again, remember this. You once found your way through a year of silence, and you filled it with light." Jamie came by with his daughter one weekend. Margaret watched them from the porch, laughing, chasing a balloon, spinning in circles. Her granddaughter waved. Margaret waved back. Then she whispered to herself, "I'm still here." She opened another letter that night. "I always wanted to grow old with you. I didn't know it could still happen in this way." The last letter sat alone in the box. She didn't open it, not yet. Instead, she wrote her own, folded it, placed it inside the now empty space, a balance, a full circle. And when she finally opened his last words days later, they simply read, "Thank you for reading. Thank you for staying. Thank you for not forgetting me. I never forgot you." And with that, the silence returned. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was complete. So if you're still here reading this, maybe there's someone in your life who needs a letter. Maybe that someone is you. Write, speak, forgive, begin. And if these stories speak to your heart, subscribe to Unbroken Stories. Because if she made it through the silence, maybe you can too.